Thanksgiving morning in Milwaukee always carried a particular kind of cold. Not the dramatic blizzard cold of Christmas, but a quiet, bone-deep chill that settled into everything: the sidewalks, the bare trees, the windows of my childhood home where condensation gathered in the corners like tears that refused to fall. I sat in my rental car outside my parents' house, engine still running, heat blasting against my face while I stared at the front door. The same door I had walked through thousands of times growing up. The same chipped paint around the frame that Dad had been meaning to fix for 15 years. The same welcome mat that said, "Bless this home," in faded letters that no longer quite believed themselves. My name is Rachel Donovan. I am 36 years old, and I am the Chief Technology Officer at a healthcare software company called MedSync Solutions in Austin, Texas. On paper, that title sounds impressive. In reality, it means I spend 60 to 70 hours a week managing a team of 200 engineers, navigating impossible deadlines, and carrying the kind of stress that shows up in my jaw at night when I grind my teeth hard enough to crack fillings. The salary is substantial. Close to $620,000 a year, when you factor in bonuses, stock options, and the golden handcuffs that keep me tethered to a desk instead of a life. But I have never felt wealthy. I have felt obligated. For the past 11 years, I have been the financial backbone of the Donovan family. The one who pays the mortgage when Dad's disability checks fall short. The one who covers my brother Kevin's rent when his latest scheme collapses. The one who sends money for Mom's prescriptions, for the car repairs, for the emergencies that seem to arrive with suspicious regularity. I have sent close to $580,000 over those 11 years. I know the number because I finally added it up last month, sitting alone in my Austin apartment at 2 a.m., staring at bank statements that read like a chronicle of my own disappearance. As I sat in that rental car, watching my breath fog the windshield, I told myself this Thanksgiving would be different. I had flown in the night before, booked a hotel instead of staying at the house, and promised myself I would set boundaries. I would enjoy one holiday without feeling like a walking checkbook. I had no idea that within 3 hours, my mother would say something that would shatter the last thread of hope I had been clinging to for years. And I had no idea that by the time the turkey was carved, I would walk out of that house and never return. To understand why those words cut so deeply, you have to understand what the Donovan family looked like from the inside. My father, Dennis Donovan, worked at the same manufacturing plant for 28 years before a forklift accident crushed 3 vertebrae in his lower back and ended his career at 52. The settlement was modest, eaten quickly by medical bills and a mortgage that should have been paid off years earlier, but had been refinanced twice for reasons no one ever fully explained to me. He spent most of his days now in a recliner, watching game shows and nursing a bitterness that leaked into every conversation like a slow poison. He had been a different man when I was young. Harder in some ways, but also more present. He taught me to ride a bike in the driveway of that old house, running alongside me with his hand on the seat until suddenly he wasn't there and I was flying on my own. He helped me with math homework at the kitchen table, his patience surprising both of us. He showed up to every one of my school plays, even the terrible one where I played a singing carrot. But the accident changed him. The constant pain, the disability checks that never quite covered what his salary used to. The humiliation of depending on others after decades of being the provider. Somewhere in those first years of recovery, the father I remembered disappeared behind a wall of resentment and pride. My mother, Patricia, had never worked outside the home. She raised 3 children, managed a household on a tight budget, and developed a talent for making everyone feel simultaneously loved and guilty. She had a way of sighing that could communicate disappointment across a crowded room, a way of praising one child that somehow diminished another. She kept mental ledgers of every sacrifice she had ever made, and she was not shy about reading from them when she needed leverage. In her mind, she had given up everything for her family. A potential nursing career she never actually pursued. Social opportunities that existed mostly in her imagination. A version of herself that might have bloomed if she hadn't been so busy serving everyone else. Whether these sacrifices were real or constructed, I could never quite determine. But the debt she believed we owed her was very real, and she collected on it constantly. Then there was Kevin, my older brother by 4 years. Kevin had been the golden child from the moment he arrived, the son my father had wanted, the center of my mother's universe. He had the easy smile and natural charm that made teachers forgive missed assignments and coaches overlook missed practices. He was the kid who could talk his way out of any trouble and into any opportunity. The one everyone believed would go far, because he made believing feel good. He had been offered a scholarship to play at a small college in Indiana, but an injury his sophomore year ended that dream and, according to the family narrative, derailed his entire life. Kevin was 40 now, and still finding himself. He had tried real estate, personal training, cryptocurrency trading, motivational speaking, and most recently, a line of artisanal hot sauces that required a $15,000 investment I had been pressured into providing. The hot sauce company lasted 4 months before dissolving into excuses about market timing and supplier issues. And then there was me, Rachel, the middle child, the quiet one, the girl who got straight A's because no one was paying attention anyway. I had worked 3 jobs through college, graduated with honors in computer science, and clawed my way up through the tech industry while my family barely acknowledged my existence. Until I started making real money. Suddenly, I mattered. Suddenly, my phone rang with requests disguised as conversations. Suddenly, I was included in family decisions, not for my opinion, but for my wallet. The first time I sent money home was in 2013. Right after I got promoted to senior developer. Dad had called, his voice gruff with embarrassment, explaining that the mortgage was 3 months behind and the bank was threatening foreclosure. I wired $8,000 without hesitation because that is what family does. That should have been a one-time rescue. Instead, it became a pattern that stretched across 11 years and consumed nearly everything I earned beyond my own basic survival. I finally cut the engine and stepped out of the car, grabbing the shopping bags from the back seat. I had brought wine, flowers, a cheese platter from a specialty shop, and a cashmere throw blanket for Mom that cost more than I wanted to admit. Offerings, I realized now. Tributes to a family that had trained me to buy my place at the table. The front door opened before I reached the porch. Mom stood there in an apron, her silver hair freshly styled, a smile spreading across her face that looked almost genuine. "Rachel, you're here." She pulled me into a hug that smelled like perfume and pie crust. "We were starting to wonder if your flight got delayed. I told you I'd be here by 10. I know. I just worry." She took the bags from my hands, peering inside with obvious interest. "Oh, this looks lovely. You always bring such nice things." The house looked the same as it had for 30 years. Same carpet, same furniture, same family photos arranged on the wall in chronological order, stopping abruptly around my high school graduation as if time had frozen. The television murmured from the living room where Dad sat in his recliner, one hand resting on the remote like a scepter. "Rachel's here," Mom called out, as if announcing the arrival of a visiting dignitary. Dad grunted something that might have been a greeting without looking away from the screen. Kevin emerged from the kitchen, already holding a beer despite the early hour. His hair was thinner than last year, his gut rounder, but his smile still carried that boyish charm that had always made people forgive him for everything. "There she is, the big shot from Texas." He wrapped me in a hug that felt performative, something for Mom's benefit rather than mine. "How's the tech world treating you?" "Busy," I said, "always busy." "Must be nice though, all that money rolling in." He laughed like it was a joke, but his eyes held something sharper. "Some of us are still grinding it out the hard way." I bit back the response that sat on my tongue. The one about how grinding it out meant showing up every day, not launching a new venture every 6 months and expecting someone else to fund it. "Kevin's been working on something exciting," Mom interjected, sensing the tension. "Tell her about the consulting business." "Entrepreneurial consulting," Kevin corrected, puffing up slightly. "I'm helping small business owners avoid the mistakes I made, turning my experience into wisdom, you know?" I nodded and made appropriate sounds while my stomach tightened. I could already see where this was heading. Another pitch, another ask, Another expectation that I would open my wallet to fund his latest reinvention. "We can talk about it later," Mom said, steering me toward the kitchen. "Right now, I need help with the sweet potatoes." The kitchen was warm and cluttered, every surface covered with bowls and pans and ingredients in various stages of preparation. I fell into the familiar rhythm of cooking alongside my mother, peeling potatoes and stirring sauces while she chattered about the neighbors, the weather, the church gossip I had no context for. For a moment, it almost felt normal. Almost felt like family. Then Aunt Carol arrived with her husband Frank, followed by Uncle David and his wife Maureen, followed by my cousin Lisa with her 3 children, who immediately scattered through the house like a small invasion force. The living room filled with noise and movement, and I found myself pressed into service as the unofficial assistant, fetching drinks and finding extra chairs and answering the same questions about Austin and my job and why I still was not married. Through it all, I noticed Mom watching me with an expression I could not quite read. Something calculating behind her smile. Something waiting. We gathered around the dining room table at 2 p.m., the turkey gleaming golden at the center, surrounded by bowls of mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce, and the sweet potato dish I had spent an hour preparing. Dad said a brief grace that felt more like an obligation than a prayer. And then platters began circulating. The conversation flowed in predictable patterns. Uncle David complained about his property, taxes. Aunt Carol bragged about her grandson's soccer achievements. Lisa's children whined about the food they did not want to eat. Kevin dominated the table with stories about his consulting clients, names I suspected were invented, successes I knew were exaggerated. I sat quietly, answering questions when asked, contributing just enough to avoid attention. It was a skill I had perfected over decades, the art of being present without being noticed. Then Mom clinked her fork against her glass. "Before we get too deep into the meal," she said, her voice carrying that formal tone she used for announcements, "I wanted to take a moment to talk about something important." The table fell silent. I felt a familiar dread creeping up my spine. "As you all know, this has been a challenging year for our family." She glanced at Dad, who stared at his plate. "The medical bills have been substantial, the house needs repairs we've been putting off. And Kevin's new business is just getting started, so he needs some runway to make it work." She turned to look directly at me. "Rachel, honey, we've been talking, and we think it's time for a more formal arrangement. Instead of you sending money here and there whenever something comes up, we thought it would be easier if you just contributed a set amount each month. Something we could count on. Something stable." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What kind of amount are we talking about?" "Well, we ran the numbers." She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket, and I realized with horror that she had actually prepared for this. "Between the mortgage supplement, the medical expenses, Kevin's startup costs, and a little cushion for emergencies, we think $8,000 a month would cover everything nicely." $8,000 a month. $96,000 a year. Nearly a sixth of my gross income gone before I could even think about my own retirement, my own future, my own life. That's... I struggled to find words. "That's a lot, Mom." "Is it though?" Kevin leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I mean, you make what, $500,000 a year? More? $8,000 is nothing to you." "It's not nothing. Come on, Rach." His voice took on an edge. "You fly business class, you stay in hotels instead of with family, you bring fancy cheese platters like we're supposed to be impressed. Meanwhile, Dad can barely afford his medications, and I'm trying to build something that could actually help people. A little perspective, maybe?" I looked around the table, searching for an ally. Uncle David studied his plate. Aunt Carol sipped her wine. Lisa was occupied with her children. Dad sat motionless, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on some middle distance that had nothing to do with me. "I already send money every month," I said quietly. "I've been doing it for 11 years. And we appreciate that, honey." Mom's voice dripped with a sweetness that felt manufactured. "But this would be more organized, more predictable. You're so good with systems at your job. Surely you can see the benefit of systematizing this too." "The benefit to you, maybe." The words came out sharper than I intended. Mom's smile flickered. "I'm not sure what you mean by that." I mean, I've sent nearly $600,000 to this family over the last decade. I've paid off credit cards, covered medical bills, funded Kevin's businesses, kept this house from being foreclosed twice, and not once has anyone asked how I'm doing. Not once has anyone wondered if maybe I'm struggling too. Struggling? Kevin laughed, the sound harsh and dismissive. You drive a Tesla. You own stock options. What exactly are you struggling with? I'm struggling with the fact that I'm 36 years old, and I've never taken a real vacation because every time I save enough money, someone in this family has an emergency. I'm struggling with the fact that I work 70 hours a week, and I can't even afford to buy a house because my down payment keeps disappearing into other people's problems. I'm struggling with the fact that no matter how much I give, it's never enough. It's never even acknowledged. The table had gone completely silent. Even Lisa's children sensed the shift and stopped their squirming. Mom set down her fork with a careful precision that I recognized as anger barely contained. Rachel, this is exactly what I was worried about. You've gotten so caught up in your career, in your money, that you've forgotten what family means. Family supports each other. Family sacrifices. Your father worked his whole life to provide for us, and now that he can't, it falls to the children to step up. That's how it works. Kevin stepping up. How exactly? By starting businesses that fail and expecting me to cover the losses? Hey! Kevin's face reddened. At least I'm trying to create something. What do you create? Lines of code? That's not real work. It's paid your rent for the last 3 years. Enough. Dad's voice cut through the room, ragged and harsh. He pushed himself up from his chair, one hand braced on the table for support. I'm sick of this. Every holiday the same thing. Rachel comes in here with her fancy gifts and her fancy job and acts like she's better than us, like we should be grateful she deigns to visit. Dad? That's not. I didn't ask for your charity, he continued, his voice rising. I worked for 30 years, broke my back for this family, and now I have to listen to my daughter complain about writing checks? You have no idea what sacrifice looks like. I stared at him, feeling something crack inside my chest. I've given you nearly everything I've earned, I said quietly. I've given until there's nothing left for myself. And you're saying I don't know sacrifice? Mom stood up then, moving around the table toward me with that particular glide she used when she was about to deliver a killing blow. You want acknowledgement, Rachel? Fine, I'll acknowledge you. You're the family ATM. That's your role. That's what you're good at. We don't need your opinions or your complaints or your self-pity. We need your money. And if you can't accept that gracefully, then maybe you should ask yourself what else you have to offer. The words hung in the air like smoke. The family ATM. That's what I was to them. Not a daughter, not a sister, not a person. A machine that dispensed cash when they pressed the right buttons. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me. The room felt tilted, the familiar dining room suddenly foreign and hostile. Thank you for being honest, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. For the first time, you've actually been honest with me. I walked to the front door, grabbed my coat from the hook where I had hung it 3 hours earlier, and stepped out into the cold November air. Behind me, I heard Mom's voice calling my name. I heard Kevin saying something about drama queens. I heard Aunt Carol asking what had just happened. I didn't turn around. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove away from the house where I grew up, and I never went back. The drive to my hotel took 15 minutes. I don't remember most of it. My hands moved on the steering wheel, my foot pressed the pedals, my eyes tracked the road, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. Replaying the words, feeling them cut deeper with each repetition. The family ATM. Not Rachel. Not daughter. Not sister. Not even a name that acknowledged my humanity. Just a machine that dispensed cash. A function to be used and discarded when empty. I pulled into the hotel parking lot and sat there as the engine cooled, watching the dashboard lights fade to darkness. Outside, other cars carried other families to other destinations, people who probably had their own complicated dynamics and hidden resentments, but who might also have moments of genuine connection that made the complications worthwhile. I wondered if I had ever truly had those moments. Or if I had just been so desperate to belong that I had invented them, filled in the gaps with hope instead of evidence. My phone had buzzed 6 times during the drive. I finally looked at the screen. 2 texts from Mom. Rachel, come back. We need to talk about this like adults. And then, you're being dramatic. This is exactly what I mean about your attitude. 1 text from Kevin. Way to ruin Thanksgiving. Hope you're proud of yourself. 1 text from Aunt Carol. Honey, your mother is very upset. Maybe you should apologize? 2 missed calls from Dad's phone, though I doubted he had made them himself. Probably Mom, trying different numbers to get through. I stared at those messages for a long moment. The familiar pull of obligation tugged at my chest, the voice that said I should smooth things over, apologize for causing a scene, find a way to make everyone comfortable again at my own expense. But underneath that voice, something else was speaking now, something that sounded surprisingly like clarity. They were not sorry for what they had said. They were sorry I had reacted. They were not asking for reconciliation. They were asking me to return to my position so the money could continue flowing. I opened my contacts and scrolled to the entries I knew by heart. Mom, Dad, Kevin. 3 names that had once meant safety, belonging, home. My thumb hovered over the first name. Then I pressed block. I did the same for Dad. Then Kevin. When it was done, I sat in the silence and waited to feel something. Guilt, maybe. Regret. The pull of obligation that had governed my life for so long. What I felt instead was a strange, hollow lightness. Like a building that had finally stopped burning, leaving only ash and empty space where something used to stand. I got out of the car and walked into the hotel on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The lobby was decorated for the holidays, a massive tree twinkling in the corner, wreaths hanging on every door. Families passed through on their way to Thanksgiving dinners, dressed up and laughing, looking like the kind of people who belonged to each other. In my room, I ordered room service and ate turkey with mashed potatoes from a plastic container while watching a movie I couldn't follow. The food tasted like cardboard. The movie was noise. Everything felt muffled, distant, as if I were experiencing the world through a thick layer of glass. Around 8 p.m., someone knocked on my door. For a moment, my heart jumped, thinking maybe someone had driven to find me, to apologize, to bridge the gap that had cracked open at that dining room table. It was housekeeping, asking if I needed extra towels. I thanked them and closed the door on the small hope that had flickered to life without my permission. That night, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, running calculations in my head that I had been avoiding for years. The money I had sent, the sacrifices I had made, the life I had deferred while propping up people who saw me as a resource rather than a relative. $580,000, 11 years, countless missed opportunities, and in return, I had been called the family ATM in front of aunts and uncles and cousins, my value reduced to a function, my humanity stripped away with 4 words. Somewhere around 3 a.m., I made a decision. I was done. Flying back to Austin the next morning felt like escaping a burning building. The plane lifted off and I watched Milwaukee shrink below me, the familiar grid of streets and houses becoming abstract, becoming irrelevant, becoming past tense. The first week was strange. My phone stayed quiet in ways it never had before. No texts asking for money. No calls with vague emergencies that somehow always required a check. No subtle guilt trips disguised as family updates. I kept waiting for the withdrawal symptoms, the guilt that had always followed whenever I tried to set boundaries. But the guilt didn't come. Or rather, it came in small waves that I learned to recognize and release, like clouds passing across the sun. I went back to work. The familiar rhythm of code and meetings and problem-solving provided a structure I desperately needed. My team noticed something different about me, though no one could quite name it. "You seem lighter?" my assistant said one morning, setting a coffee on my desk. "Did you do something different over the holiday?" I smiled and said I had just gotten some rest. The truth was more complicated. I had amputated a part of my life that had been poisoning me for years. The wound was still fresh, still bleeding in places I couldn't see, but the infection was gone. And for the first time since I could remember, I could imagine a future that wasn't defined by someone else's need. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, my mother's sister, Aunt Linda, called me from a number I didn't have blocked. She was the family member I had always been closest to, the one who sent birthday cards even when she forgot everyone else's. the one who had pulled me aside at my grandfather's funeral and told me I was going to do great things. I almost didn't answer. But something in me still craved connection, still hoped for a version of family that didn't require me to disappear. "Rachel, honey, I need to tell you what's happening," she said, her voice careful and low like she was afraid of being overheard. "Your mother has been calling everyone in the family, telling them you abandoned them. She's saying you cut them off without warning, that you're having some kind of breakdown, that your career has made you cold and selfish." I closed my eyes and breathed through the familiar sting. What's the version she's not telling? I was hoping you could fill me in on that part. So I did. I told Aunt Linda about the 11 years of transfers, the $580,000 I had calculated, the requests that never ended and the gratitude that never came. I told her about the dinner table, the speech about the monthly contribution, and the moment my mother reduced me to an acronym. Aunt Linda was quiet for a long time. "I had no idea," she finally said. "Patricia always made it sound like you helped out here and there, just being a good daughter. She never mentioned amounts. She never mentioned how often." She wouldn't. It would ruin the narrative. "Rachel, I want you to know that I don't think you're cold or selfish. I think you've been carrying a weight that nobody should have to carry alone, and I think walking away from that table was the bravest thing you could have done." The tears I had been holding back finally broke free. I sat at my kitchen counter in Austin, 1,000 miles from Milwaukee, and cried while my aunt listened without trying to fix anything. "What do I do now?" I asked when I could speak again. "You live, honey. You live the life you've been putting on hold. You let yourself want things that are just for you, and you let the people who hurt you face the consequences of their own choices." Those consequences arrived faster than I expected. In January, I received a letter forwarded from my old address in Milwaukee. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize, Morrison and Keller Associates, representing my parents in what they called a family support matter. The letter, typed on expensive cream-colored stationery with an embossed letterhead, claimed I had been providing financial assistance that my parents had come to rely upon, and that my sudden withdrawal of that support constituted a breach of implied obligation. The language was dense with legal jargon, but the message was clear. They believed they had a right to my money, and they were willing to pursue it through the courts if necessary. I read it 3 times, my hands shaking with a mixture of fury and disbelief. They were trying to sue me for not giving them money. After everything I had already given, after 11 years of carrying them, after $580,000 transferred without expectation of return, they had the audacity to hire lawyers to demand more. I called my own attorney immediately, a woman named Diana Chen, who had handled my contract negotiations at MedSync and who I trusted implicitly. She listened to my explanation, asked pointed questions about the timeline and amounts involved, and then let out a long sigh. "Rachel, there's no legal basis for this. Adult children in this country have no obligation to support their parents. What you gave was voluntary, and you can stop at any time for any reason. This letter is a pressure tactic, not a legitimate legal threat. It's designed to scare you into compliance." "But they hired a law firm. Doesn't that mean something?" "It means they found someone willing to take their money to write a letter. Any attorney worth their license knows this case has no merit. They're probably counting on you not knowing that." "So what do I do?" "We respond with documentation. Every transfer you made, every request they sent, every piece of evidence showing this was charitable support, not contractual obligation. We make it clear that if they pursue this, they'll be exposing their own pattern of dependency to public record, and we mention that harassment through frivolous legal threats has consequences of its own." "Will they actually go to court? Honestly? Probably not. They don't have a case, and any judge would throw it out in the first hearing. But they might be counting on you folding just to make the pressure stop. That's how it's worked before, hasn't it?" She was right. Every time I had tried to set boundaries, the pressure had escalated until I caved. The emergency calls, the guilt trips, the family members recruited to change my mind. They had learned that persistence worked, that I would eventually break. But I was done breaking. Send the response, I said. Make it clear, I'm not their ATM anymore. And Diana, if they try anything else, I want to be prepared to countersue for harassment. Already drafting the language. The legal threat evaporated as quickly as it had appeared. Diana sent a comprehensive letter documenting my voluntary contributions and the family's pattern of escalating demands. She included a note suggesting that any continued harassment would result in counter-filings for emotional distress and defamation. I never heard from that law firm again. But the family campaign continued through other channels. Mom apparently told everyone who would listen that I had abandoned my disabled father, that I was hoarding wealth while my brother struggled, that success had corrupted me into someone unrecognizable. Cousin Lisa sent me a lengthy text about the importance of forgiveness. Uncle David left a voicemail expressing his disappointment. Kevin's ex-wife, of all people, reached out on Facebook to tell me I was making a mistake I would regret. I blocked them all. Not out of anger, though anger was certainly part of it. I blocked them because every message felt like a hook trying to drag me back into a current I had finally escaped. Every word was designed to make me doubt my own perception, my own experience, my own right to protect myself. Some nights I lay awake wondering if they were right. If I was cold, if I was selfish, if walking away from family made me the monster they claimed I was. But then I would remember the table, the speech, the 4 words that had crystallized everything. The family ATM. You cannot argue with someone who has already decided your value, you can only leave. Spring arrived in Austin with blue bonnets blooming along the highways, and temperatures warm enough to remind me why I had moved south in the first place. I started running again. Something I had abandoned years ago, when work consumed every free moment. I started cooking. Real meals with fresh ingredients instead of the takeout that had sustained me through countless overtime nights. I started reading books that had nothing to do with technology, novels and memoirs, and poetry collections that reminded me there was more to life than code. I also started therapy. Her name was Dr. Marika Okonkwo, a Nigerian-American psychologist who specialized in family systems and financial trauma. The first time I sat in her office, a warm space filled with plants and soft lighting and art from various African countries, I told her I wasn't sure I actually needed help. I was fine, I was functioning, I was just dealing with a difficult family situation. She smiled gently and said that functioning was a very low bar for someone who had been financially and emotionally exploited for over a decade. That word, exploited, hit me like a physical blow. I had never framed it that way. I had always told myself I was helping, supporting, being a good daughter. The idea that I had been used, that my generosity had been weaponized against me, that my family had seen my success not as an achievement to celebrate, but as a resource to extract, felt simultaneously obvious and revolutionary. But I chose to give, I protested. They didn't force me. Did you, though? She asked softly. Or were you trained from childhood to believe that your worth depended on what you provided? Were you ever given the option to say no without consequences? I thought about that question for a long time. I thought about the guilt trips when I hesitated, the silent treatments when I questioned, the family narrative that positioned me as the successful one who should help the struggling ones, as if my success had come without sacrifice, without struggle, without cost. We spent months unpacking the patterns. The childhood training that taught me my worth came from what I provided. The invisible contract that bound me to endless giving. The way my mother had positioned herself as gatekeeper to family love, doling out approval only when I performed correctly. You were parentified, Dr. Okonkwo explained one session. From a young age, you were given adult responsibilities and made to feel that the family's stability depended on you. That's a form of emotional abuse, Rachel, even if it doesn't look like the dramatic kind. But they weren't cruel, I said. They just needed help. They may have needed help, but they also chose to demand it in ways that disregarded your humanity. They chose to see you as a function rather than a person. That choice is not something you made for them, and you are not responsible for the consequences of refusing to accept it anymore. She taught me about boundaries. Real boundaries, not the watered-down versions I had tried to set before. She explained the difference between guilt, which comes from violating your own values, and shame, which comes from violating other people's expectations. She helped me see that the crushing weight I had carried for years was not love, but obligation. And that real love never requires you to disappear. Slowly, painfully, I began to rewrite the stories I had told myself. The story of the dutiful daughter became the story of the exploited provider. The story of the struggling family became the story of people who refused to take responsibility for their own lives. The story of my failure to be enough became the story of their failure to see me at all. It was not easy. Some days I slipped back into guilt, into longing, into the desperate wish that things could have been different. But more and more, I found myself standing on solid ground, building a life that was mine, making choices based on what I wanted, not what I owed. In June, I met someone. His name was Marcus, a pediatric surgeon at the hospital where MedSync had just installed a new records system. We met in the cafeteria during a software training session, bonding over terrible coffee and a shared frustration with institutional bureaucracy. Our first date was dinner at a small Italian place near the river. We talked for 4 hours without noticing the time, about work and family and the strange path that had brought us both to Austin. When I told him, carefully, that I was estranged from my family, he didn't flinch or ask probing questions. He simply said, "That must have been painful. I'm glad you're here now." Something in me, something that had been braced for judgment, relaxed for the first time in years. We took things slowly. He had his own wounds, a difficult divorce, a strained relationship with his father, the particular exhaustion that comes from a career spent witnessing suffering. We understood each other in ways that didn't require explanation. By autumn, we were spending most weekends together. He cooked breakfast while I read in his living room. I helped him pick out furniture for his spare room. We talked about the future with a casualness that felt revolutionary to someone who had spent so long just surviving. One evening, lying on his couch with my head in his lap, I told him the full story. The money, the dinner table, the 4 words that had ended everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You know what strikes me about that story?" he finally said. "What?" "They never once asked what you needed. In 11 years of you providing for them, did anyone ever ask what you needed?" The question landed somewhere deep, in a place I had protected with layers of rationalization and denial. "No." I admitted. "They never asked." He stroked my hair gently. "Then they didn't deserve you, and the fact that you walked away means you finally knew that too." The following Thanksgiving, my first anniversary of walking away, I woke up in my own apartment to sunlight streaming through windows I had chosen myself. Marcus was making coffee in my kitchen, singing along badly to a song on his phone. Outside, Austin stretched warm and green beneath a clear November sky. No flight to Milwaukee. No shopping for offerings. No bracing myself for whatever ambush awaited at the dining table. Instead, we drove to a restaurant that overlooked the river and ate a meal prepared by strangers who expected nothing from me except payment. We talked about travel plans and work projects and whether we should get a dog together. Normal things. Couple things. Things I had never allowed myself to imagine while I was still carrying a family that refused to carry itself. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I answered without thinking, still relaxed and warm from the meal. "Rachel?" The voice was my father's, older and thinner than I remembered. "It's Dad. Please don't hang up." I walked to the balcony, sliding the door closed behind me to give Marcus privacy. "How did you get this number?" "Linda gave it to me. She said it was wrong, but she gave it to me anyway. I needed to talk to you." "I'm listening." There was a long pause, filled with the sound of his breathing, ragged and uneven. "Your mother had a stroke last month," he said. "She's okay now, mostly, but it scared us. It scared me. Made me think about things I've been avoiding." I waited, feeling nothing. "I know we made mistakes," he continued. "I know we asked too much and gave too little. I know your mother said something unforgivable at that dinner. I was there, I didn't stop her. That's on me too." "Why are you calling me, Dad?" "Because I'm dying, Rachel." His voice cracked on the word. "The doctors found cancer a few months ago. It's in my lungs, my liver. They're talking months now, not years." The news should have hit me harder. A year ago, it would have sent me spiraling into guilt and obligation and the desperate need to fix things. But something in me had healed over the past 12 months. The wound was still there, but it no longer controlled me. "I'm sorry you're sick," I said, and I meant it. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. "I'm not calling to ask for money," he said quickly. "I'm not calling to guilt you into coming home. I just wanted you to know. And I wanted to say I'm sorry, really sorry, for all of it." I stood on my balcony, looking out at a city that felt like home, holding a phone that connected me to a past I had left behind. "Thank you for saying that," I said finally. "I accept your apology. But Dad, I'm not coming back. I can't go back to being who I was in that house. That version of me nearly disappeared completely." "I understand." His voice was small now, defeated. "I just wanted you to know I see it now. What we did to you, what I let happen, you deserved better." "I did," I agreed, "and now I'm giving myself what I deserve." We said goodbye with a finality that felt more honest than anything we had shared in years. I went back inside, where Marcus was waiting with concern in his eyes, and I told him what had happened. "Are you okay?" he asked. I thought about the question carefully. "Yeah," I said. "I think I actually am. I never saw my father again. He died in March, 6 months after that phone call. Aunt Linda sent me an email letting me know, asking if I wanted to attend the funeral. I didn't go. Some people would judge me for that. Some people would say you only get one father, that death changes everything, that I should have set aside my pain for the sake of closure. But I had already found my closure. It came not from a deathbed reconciliation, but from a year of living free from the obligations that had crushed me. It came from building a life that was mine. It came from learning that love should never require you to disappear. I sent flowers to the funeral with a card that said simply, "You taught me many things. Some of them hurt, some of them helped. I hope you found peace." Mom never acknowledged the flowers. Kevin called once from a number I didn't recognize, leaving a voicemail that mixed grief with accusation, asking how I could abandon the family when they needed me most. I deleted it without finishing. It has been 3 years now since that Thanksgiving dinner. 3 years since 4 words shattered the last of my illusions. 3 years since I blocked the numbers and walked away from everything I thought I was supposed to be. I am still the CTO at MedSync, though I have learned to work differently now. 45 hours a week instead of 70. Weekends that belong to me. Vacations that actually happen. The work is still demanding, but it no longer defines me. Marcus and I bought a house together last spring. A little craftsman bungalow with a garden and room for the dog we finally adopted. A rescue mutt named Theo, who sleeps at the foot of our bed and doesn't care how much money I make. I still talk to Aunt Linda occasionally. She tells me Mom is doing better after the stroke, that Kevin is trying yet another business venture, that the old house on Oak Street has finally been sold. I listen to these updates with a strange neutrality, like hearing news about characters in a book I read long ago. The people she describes feel distant now. Important once, but no longer central to my story. Sometimes late at night, I still think about those 11 years. The money I sent, the opportunities I missed, the life I put on hold for people who never saw me clearly. But the regret doesn't consume me anymore. It sits beside me like an old scar, a reminder of something survived rather than something that defines me. What defines me now is different. It is the home I built with someone who loves me as a person, not a provider. It is the work I do because I find it meaningful, not because I need to fund other people's lives. It is the boundaries I maintain without apology, the choices I make for myself, the simple revolutionary act of existing on my own terms. If you are listening to this, and you recognize something of your own story in mine, I want you to know something important. You are not an ATM. You are not a function. You are not obligated to disappear into other people's needs until there is nothing left of you. You are allowed to walk away from tables where your only value is what you provide. You are allowed to block the numbers that ring with nothing but demands. You are allowed to build a life that is yours. I blocked my mother's number on Thanksgiving 3 years ago, and I have never looked back. The life I found on the other side was waiting for me all along. It might be waiting for you too.